you're in agreement, what I'll do is I'll circulate some of the stuff that she's written on the exercises so that we can have a better sense of what it is that she's trying to do with using those pedagogical practices in the context of law. And then we can maybe try to have like an ongoing discussion electronically or something like that. Because I think one, she would love it, and for sure I would love it. Because if it's something that if it is something that we want to keep doing, then these are really important questions to get at. Oh, yeah.
Just another comment. I mean, I think one of the interesting things about doing this in the context of law is that the physical realm and even the observation realm, the factual observation realm, are actually not the realm of law. You know, law is very cognitive, and quite often the people who choose law are people who, not all, but there can be people who choose law who are not particularly comfortable in the physical realm. And, you know, so it can create, it shifts around people's comfort levels. It asks people if they're prepared to move a bit beyond their comfort level. It allows the people who are maybe more comfortable in the physical realm, and actually, even though they're in law school, less comfortable in the cognitive realm, it sort of says, here's a little space for you to play. It just sort of widens the realm of possibility within the classroom, I think.
Yeah, and I think the point that I take away from it the most is that law tends to be a place where the fact that we embody law every day, that law is an embodied concept and something that we live through our bodies, it seems to be completely absent in curricula, in our understanding of law, in the way that we talk about law. And so this is just one way of making that really obvious. Or maybe not making it really obvious, but one way to get us thinking about that, to get us talking about it. I want to give us time for Ummni I'm just going to talk about creative interventions in the classroom.
Yeah. So it's really funny that Rosh is here because I'm going to be talking about stuff that I did in a class with her. And she did a brilliant creative intervention into the classroom in the class that I taught. Okay, so here we are. I have just started teaching January 2009, so it's very new to me, and probably, unlike for many of you, I didn't actually ever teach before I started my assistant professor job. I did TA stuff, and I co-taught, but I was never a course director until a year and a half. So some of you actually have more teaching experience than me, I bet. So please feel free to jump in and tell me about your experiences. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is trying to bring creativity into the classroom, to try and get us to think about, to get students to think about concepts and issues, not just from a very standard social science perspective, which is how most of them are taught in law schools and in the legal studies program and the criminology program that I teach at Carleton, in two ways. And one is to bring creativity as something we're going to look at, a creative, watching a film or reading a short story. And two, it's to get them to do something creative, or giving them the option to do something creative instead of paper. So we'll talk about some of the epistemological benefits, I'd say, and some of the challenges. But before I jump into it, just the one little piece of theory. If you don't know the book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which Augusta Wall, who does Theater of the Oppressed, Jillian stuff is based on it, this is like one of the key texts to try to think through education in a different way. So it was written, 30, 40 years ago. And Freire basically talked about classic education as a banking system. Students are these empty accounts, and I'm going to deposit knowledge into their heads, and that's my role as an educator. So it's really a one-way street, and it's about he talks about it as narrative, the narrative of reality, and the teacher has a narrative of reality, and the student has to internalize it or pretend that they've internalized it, and they have to give them back that same narrative. So if you haven't read the book, I really actually recommend looking at it, because it's a lot of the stuff we actually have obviously changed. Pedagogy has changed in the last, whatever decades, and we do much more interactive stuff, and we try and make space for various perspectives and methodologies. But it's still kind of a good thing to look at, I think, from just to get your kind of the foundations of that kind of critical pedagogy. Okay, so we, as educators, all of us, I'm sure, assign critical work, like critical race theory, that challenges the assumptions of the supposed cultural neutrality of our law. And then we open up space for students to talk about it in the seminars. But when we ask them to produce some piece of work at the end, we almost always ask for a research paper, where the student goes and reads important academic articles and weaves them together. Hopefully has an original thesis, but most of that is putting together other people's opinions into a paper, which I think is very valuable. I mean, obviously, I think it's important, and I'm glad that university does it. I write academic papers and I sign them, but I think it can be oppressive. I think it can be limiting. I think it can reinforce that the banking metaphor that Freire talks about, where students are kind of limited in different ways that they can think. So, and in a very kind of rational, linear way in particular. So, I'm just going to show you this because in one, I'll let you read it and then I'll talk about it. One of my students wrote this for one of my classes. So anyway, one of my students did put a zine together on social control, and this was part of it. And I just think it's I teach discipline and punish, Foucault's discipline and punish, and he makes a big deal about how factories and schools all resemble prisons. And to a certain extent, you see that the classroom is a place to discipline, right? To put you in your place, to categorize you. Are you an A+ student? Great, this is going to be your role. Are you a C student? Well, think about something else. So when I approach pedagogy, I want to undiscipline the students a little. So I'm talking specifically from a social, like teaching a social science discipline. I think if you were teaching actually in like a literature discipline, I think it'd be neat to bring social science there, because I did my undergrad in English Lit, and I never read any social science at all. So I think part of there's just value in doing different kinds of, looking at different kinds of texts. So I taught this class, this short story called Rape Fantasies by Margaret Atwood. Anyone read it? Anyone? Okay. So it's a very interesting short story if you haven't read it. And it's ironic, right? It's Margaret Atwood, where the narrator's fantasies are about making a human connection with a potential rapist, right? That's the play on the word fantasy. So I signed it to my feminist legal theory class, and thinking that we're going to talk about cultural feminism and how, to a certain extent, I think the story constructs women's sexuality in a kind of hygienic way. Sanitized, hygiene. Anyway, but that's not at all what happens. My students who, I guess, have never read, really studied literature in the university didn't like the story, read it as a normative story. So some of them said, well, that's so stupid, as if you're ever going to be able to rationally argue with your rapist. So they assumed that this was actually a prescription of how to defend yourself from rape. And then other students just didn't like the title and felt like by the title alone it was reinforcing, the myth that all women want to be raped. So no ability to read a text for irony, parody, how we can bring knowledge that isn't normative in and of itself. So I basically spent most of the class trying to get them to read the story as a story and not as a social science text, which was fairly shocking to me. So one of the things that I think is really important about bringing short stories, and I think people should bring it in as early as possible, isn't because it's better than a social science text, but just because it gets people to think in a different way. It just opens up your mind to different ways of thinking about rape. Rape is a very big issue for feminist legal theory. I mean, we talk about it all the time. But to talk about it in terms of its fears, in terms of the strategies that women devise as they go through their life, is a different ballgame when you do it from a creative perspective. Okay.